Hi everyone, welcome to There Will Be Cars. I'm Derek, and this week I'm testing the 2020 C8 Corvette. Let's take a closer look at this bad boy. Before I get into all the optional equipment on this one, let's just start with the design, because that's what draws everybody and their cousin. I've gotten a lot of attention in press cars before, but this is on a completely different level. People drive by, give you the thumbs up, stick their phone out of their window as they're driving just to take a picture of it behind them. People just stop, pull over as I'm shooting pictures of this and start asking questions, wanting to look around and everything. One guy yesterday, traffic was pretty slow. I heard him slow down behind me. He had his window down and he just shouted out, "Beautiful!" This car is not for the meek or the shy. You're gonna make friends wherever you go in this car, whether you want to or not. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with its styling. It's just swoopy, dramatic, a lot of sharp lines to it. Has that mid-engine supercar look to it right off the bat. Now, I gotta admit, when I first saw this online, I thought, okay, well, it's a good looking car. It's swoopy, you know, it looks the part. But I didn't really completely get it. But then it showed up in person, and I got this view of it right here. You got that big upsweep to the hips in the back. That's what sold me on this. And then all the details, you know, you got this trim work around the intake, then these really cool pointy aggressive vents for the engine, and these really bold taillights. The squared off exhausts kind of throw me for a loop. I wonder what they would look like if they were, you know, a little more angular, but that's how it is. And then this rear view, nice and wide. This is one of the best angles on this car too. And as you can tell, this does not have the Z51 package because it doesn't have the rear wing. I'll get into all the optional equipment that is on this car, but let's just take another second to walk around and appreciate the design. And one thing that I really like about these new Corvettes, aside from their styling, is just the wheel and tire setup, because a lot of performance vehicles typically go with a staggered width tire setup. This car has that, but it also has a staggered diameter setup. So up front you have 19-inch wheels wrapped in all-season tires. Let's take a look at the specs on these. Back here, you've got 20s wrapped in 305 30s. One thing Chevy did a great job of doing is concealing all of the access points so that they don't mess up the lines. So right here, you've got the release for the front trunk, or the frunk. Lift that up. And then you've got a little bit of space here. I've got my cleaning supplies and my tripod there. And the door handles are right here. This leads me to something you have to be very careful with when you're parking this car. So it looks cool, right? You got part of the intake surround right there. But look at how pointy this door is and how thick it is right there. So that protrudes out quite a bit. So when you swing the door out, you really have to be mindful that you've got a lot of real estate coming out. In case you're wondering, the LT2 does take premium fuel, but you don't have to unscrew a gas cap to fill it up. The rear trunk on the C8 can hold 2 bags of golf clubs, this target top, or, as I found out the other day, all of the bags from a $200 trip to the grocery store. I thought we were gonna have to put some in the front. As we were leaving the grocery store, I was thinking, oh boy, this is gonna be a little tricky, but had this emptied out, it took everything in there, including a big bottle of fabric softener. So as far as the optional equipment on this car, this has got optional wheels, two-tone finish. These look fantastic. They coordinate with the shadow gray metallic paint, and then you get the pop of the optional red calipers behind them. My test car also has the optional performance exhaust. Not only does that add to the sound of the LT2 V8 under the hood, it also frees up a little extra power. So as this car sits, it makes 495 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque. And speaking of the engine, let's take a look at that. Before this car came in, I started doing my research and I went to Chevy's YouTube channel. And they have a whole series of videos called Corvette Academy, just profiling all the changes and developments that they put into making this car. And one that I thought was really interesting, one that really made me nerd out, was obviously they wanted to put the engine in the car as low as possible to keep the center of gravity as low as they could. And one way they were able to do that was by equipping the engine with a dry sump oiling system. So not only is that a little more track friendly because it keeps the engine from starving for oil in high G turns, but it also allowed them to place the engine lower. So it was a win-win situation. My test car also has the 2LT equipment package and these optional GT2 seats. They're a blend of perforated leather and, as you can see, carbon fiber. So the interior upgrades and the performance exhaust and wheels and the other add-ons to this car bring the as-tested price up to $72,075. Let's get back to that interior. The 2LT equipment group is a nice sweet spot in the range. It's in the middle of the trim level selection. So you got the 1LT, the 2LT, and the 3LT. It's not the fanciest one in terms of materials because the 3LT package adds more leather in certain spots and microfiber, as well as the GT2 seats. But you can add those seats to the 2LT, which is what Chevy did with my car. Bottom line, with the 2LT, you get a lot of great features. To me, the most standout ones are the rear mirror camera and the heated and cooled seats. And that's one of the things I like about these GT2 seats, is even though they look racy and they're form-fitting and they got the racy carbon fiber touches, they're heated and ventilated. And then this car also has heated steering wheel. So, you know, it can be comfortable in all seasons. And I really like the materials that Chevy used in this car, you know. There's a good amount of leather and then, you know, some metal touches and everything, and bright work in the right spots, and accent stitching. Some more bright work there, and on the shift paddles, the steering wheel. I'd say overall, the biggest upgrade outside of performance to the C8 Corvette is the fact that its interior is as striking and dramatic as its exterior. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the C7 Grand Sport. It was a great looking car. I loved the performance, but the interior, as well equipped as it was, it didn't have the visual drama to it that the outside did. But with the C8, the inside matches the outside. Up front, you've got a head-up display, of course. Wouldn't be a Vette without one. And then this 12-inch configurable display. You can use this area right here to go between the various readouts right there. And then if you just want to focus on the really important stuff, you can simplify and just get the tach, gear indicator, and speed. And to pop out of that, just press this again. This not only tells you the individual tire pressures, but also the temperature of them, which was something that I really enjoyed about the 2019 ATS-V Coupe from Cadillac. And then right here, you've got Chevy's Infotainment 3 setup. Very slick, very glossy, very responsive. And they really simplified the hard controls. I'm glad they kept a physical volume knob, and then you've got a hard home button right there. I just wish they would have found a little more room for a tuning knob. Right here you've got one of the most distinctive interior features about the C8 Corvette, and it's this really long strip of climate control buttons. Think of it like reading a book in English, top to bottom, left to right. So this stuff up top here corresponds to the left side of the car, the driver's seat. So you got your own climate zone, seat heater, seat cooling. You can sync the climate controls, auto mode, defrost, fan split, fan speed, overall power, AC, recirc, windshield defroster, rear defroster, and then these controls on the bottom, the right side of the vehicle, these are for the passenger. When I saw the pictures of this online, I had a feeling this would take a little getting used to, and it kind of does. My preference would be for them to position the fan speed controls a little higher, because personally I don't really like auto mode in vehicles. I don't really use it, so a lot of times I'll adjust the temperature and the fan speed myself. And to adjust the fan speed on the fly, it's a little, not out of reach, but if they positioned it a little higher, it'd be a little more convenient. But I think Chevy's logic was that since the fan speed affects both climate zones, that it would be best to put this in the middle between the two control zones. The mode selector dial is down here, and it's got this nice sort of knurled finish to it, you know, a quality piece, and it's got a bit of resistance to it if you want to change the drive modes. There are two more driving modes that I haven't covered yet. Those are track and Z mode. So track mode I'll access by turning this dial. You can see the little icon down there at the bottom changes, and you can hear the change in the exhaust note as well. In Z mode, I access by pushing this button. Think of it like the M1 and M2 buttons in like a new BMW M5. It's basically just a shortcut to customized drive settings. You can change those by going into the settings menu. It's already in the vehicle tab. Go to Z mode. And then, yeah, you can tailor all of these different parameters. Let's see. What's a good setup? So, engine sound, track. Steering, let's do sport. Because the track steering is very heavy. Powertrain, I like the feel of sport. Right. And then brake response, yeah, let's do a mix. Let's go with track. There's also My Mode, which lets you configure certain features, but not as many as in Z mode. And to get to that, you turn the dial to the left, and you'll see that it goes into My Mode. I have mixed emotions about the steering wheel. As you can see, it's a rounded off square, or a squircle, and it looks really cool. It's very unusual. It looks like something out of a spaceship or something out of the future, just like the rest of the interior. In fact, my fiance and my buddy Dan both said when they sat in the passenger seat that they were in their own pod. So that's really cool, but I find the feel to be a little unnatural. So I always like to keep my hands at 9 and 3, right? And if you do that, you've got these thumb bumps right here, which is handy. But I'm also inclined to have my hands near the spokes. And these spokes, as you can see, they slope down. They have a hard slope to them, and they're positioned kind of low too. So I'm kind of torn between having my hands here or up here so that I can put my thumbs under these bumps. The other day I tried driving with my hands at 9 and 3 so my thumbs could be right here, and it just felt uncomfortable and awkward. You know, I guess I'm more used to having my hands closer to the spokes, and it makes sense because you have the paddles here. But if I do that, my thumb is too far down to run into this bump. As cool as it looks, for me personally, it's a bit of an awkward fit. It's a little out of the way, but there is a wireless phone charger in this car. So while you're out there driving on curvy roads, you can just have your phone charging in that slot. Right now, we're just gonna keep it street side. I've got it in tour mode. Just wanna show you how the Corvette behaves on regular streets. Really loving the switchgear here. You know, it's very dramatic. You know, I generally prefer like a shift lever because, you know, the button setup can be just feel a little unnatural, but I love the way they executed this. You know, you just put your finger in there, the finger hold, pull back. It's got a drama to it, and it looks really cool. And even the feel to the switchgear is great. All right, do the same for drive. Okay. Now, one thing I really loved about the C7 Grand Sport Corvette, which I reviewed on this channel, was even though it was a high-performance American sports car, it was comfortable. You know, the ride quality was nice, you know, and this car keeps that intact. Even over these, you know, big humps and heaves in the road, you know, keeps its composure. It's not spine-jarring or anything. It's comfortable. Now, you do have to kind of tenderfoot it over certain areas to make sure you don't scrape out. Now, Chevy does offer a front lift system on this car that raises the front end by about 2 inches very quickly, but this particular car doesn't have it. You're always aware, even in low speed situations, that there's a V8 behind you, because I don't know if you can hear it. Let's see if my phone picks it up. There's always this kind of deep, dirty flutter to it. And they could have just packed this car with sound deadening material and increased the weight and really just removed that sound, but they didn't, and I'm glad they didn't. All right, now getting on the freeway, put it in sport mode. You hear the change in sound already. Oh yeah. So even though I've got the target top on, there's still quite a bit of sound getting through, a lot of road noise, you know, and, you know, could it be quieter? Yes, but I think it kind of adds to the experience of the car. One thing that sports car manufacturers want to do is make you feel more connected to the road, and I know that can sound kind of cheesy, but yeah, you don't want to be completely isolated. You don't want to be in a sensory deprivation tank on wheels. I love the fact that Chevy went to the mid-engine layout for this car, but one sort of casualty of that is the view out the front is not quite what it was in the C7 Grand Sport that I tested. Now, part of that has to do with my seating position, but also, you know, there's just not, you get a little bit of fender peak, but it's not nearly as pronounced as it was in the C7. And of course, that's because, yeah, the engine's not up there. There's not as much real estate that they have to have in front of the cockpit. So yeah, you get a little bit of that, you know, that dramatic styling, but yeah, it's not, it doesn't have the visual punch from out of the windshield that the C7 had. Try out these brakes. Really easy to modulate. There's no snatch, there's no grab. Just like a regular car. There's no drama to it at all. So hopefully we're not completely stuck by slow drivers on this route we're going to take. We're going to take City Park Road here in Austin, and it's got a lot of great curves in it, elevation changes here and there. It's a great road for motorcycles, sports cars, and you do see, yeah, quite a few motorcycles out here. So one of the advantages of this mid-engine layout is that the bulk of the weight of this car is in the middle. You don't have a big lump up front that you have to combat. And of course you got a little more weight over the back end, so you know, back end's a little more planted. I've got it in sport mode right now. You just turn the wheel and it's pretty instant. That's another thing that I really enjoy about this car is not just the steering response, but the throttle response. Granted, this LT2 engine has 35 more horsepower and a little more torque than the C7 Grand Sport that I tested. It's not only more powerful, but it just seems a little livelier, you know? And it's addictive. It's got a nice weight to the steering. And there's certain curves you get into where, you know, some cars would seem to shrink in size, you know, and that's always a nice feeling. But one thing I've picked up on this car is the dimensions don't seem to change, but what happens is you get into a certain curve and this car seems to find an invisible groove in the road that's only accessible to it. It just hooks and goes. Like, it seems to almost sink to the road, become closer to it. You know, it's a great feeling, and it's not exactly one that I've experienced in other cars. You know, that's something that, in my experience, has been exclusive to this Corvette. Yeah, brakes are so easy. I mean, there's enough responsiveness right at the top of the pedal travel, you know, so you can just minutely scrub off the speed you need to take off. You know, there's no dead zone, there's no, you know, transition point where it goes from nothing to snatching. You know, it's just real easy to modulate. The visibility is great. As you can imagine, there's not a whole lot of real estate out front, you know, so forward visibility is great. The A-pillars are thin enough, you know, I don't feel like I'm hemmed in here. And the brakes on this car really just remind me part of what has made Corvettes so appealing over the years, because, you know, a lot of people daily drive these cars, and it's because, I think a lot of that is because they can be comfortable and they have a usable amount of space, you know. And even in this car, as exotic as it looks, it's not difficult to drive. It's not overly particular like the brakes, you know. Like, this is a performance car, but the brakes seem like they're out of a regular vehicle, which is not a knock against it, because, yeah, some cars, you know, they can be a little unpleasant to drive normally. And this Corvette, it's perfectly streetable, comfortable, no problems. I don't know if you're picking up on that sound, but this particular car has been upgraded with the GT2 seats. And they're very form-fitting, you know. Didn't really take a lot of bolster adjustment or anything. Like, I feel like securely held, almost like I'm sitting in a giant catcher's mitt. But the seats tend to creak sometimes. Now, I know I was lamenting the fact that you don't get those really dramatic fender peaks out in front like you do in a C7, but a benefit of not having the engine up front is this car seems smaller. This car seems a little easier to manage, at least when I'm looking out the windshield. You know, there's just not as much real estate out there. So it feels a little smaller, a little more nimble, because in the C7, it just felt massive. And yeah, you know, that's gonna happen when you've got so much engine out in front of you. That's what counts when it comes to a car like this. Is it fun? And in case you haven't gathered, I'd say it is. Now, one of the reasons Chevy finally switched to a mid-engine layout for the Corvette is that they were reaching the limits of the front-engine platform. they got up to 755 horsepower with the C7 ZR1. And obviously they weren't going to switch to all-wheel drive for a Corvette. So, you know, it makes sense that they switched the layout. You know, the more I think about it, the more I feel there were obvious external pressures on the Corvette as well. It is Chevy's flagship sports car. And when there are sedans and station wagons and crossovers that are making ridiculous amounts of power and have ways of putting that power down effectively, Corvette had to do something just from that standpoint. They had to figure out a way to make the Corvette relevant, not just in terms of performance and stats, but also in terms of wow factor. I think the Corvette, even though it's in a much different format than we've gotten used to over the past nearly 70 years, I think because of the C8, because of what Chevy's accomplished with it, the Corvette is alive and well, and it's going to continue to be. Oddly enough, I was hoping for a red light with this car because it gives me a chance to really get on the throttle from a dig, or low speed roll at least. All right, let's straighten out here and so I've switched it to manual mode right now, and you know, it is true, there's no longer a manual offered in the Corvette. The trade-off is you get a quick shifting 8-speed dual clutch automatic. And you get these nice big metallic shift paddles. They're the right height. They've got you know, carve out for your fingers. It's intuitive, it's natural, well placed. Now, one feature this gearbox has, of course you can click the left paddle to downshift, right? But if you hold it down, it jumps to the lowest possible gear so you can really get into it. The only downside is since there's no real shift lever, you can't bump them off and pretend you're like stick shifting. Take a look back there, right? That's one of the downsides of a mid-engine layout. You know, you got the slant to the engine cover. It looks really cool, and it's nice to know it's back there. Not great for rearward visibility. Fortunately, this car has the 2LT trim package. One of the features in that is Chevy's rear mirror camera, which to me is not only very helpful in any vehicle, SUV, sports car, whatever, because it gives you an external, unobstructed view of what's behind you. But in this car, given the rearward visibility limitations, to me, it's essential. So now we're in downtown Austin, and the roads are even rougher. Got it in tour mode, but so far so good. You know, this car doesn't beat you up. It's not overly stiff. You know, they don't call it comfort mode, but it is plenty comfortable. You know, if it can take these kind of chewed up lumpy roads, you know, I think that's a good sign. It's not a it's not a fillings rattler. So we just pulled up to a bookstore because my pal Dan, who's been generous enough to film all of this, Dan Wolff, look him up. He's a very talented comic artist. So look him up online. Check out his series of comics called 3-Panel Origin. They explain the origin of a supervillain or a superhero of his creation in 3 quick panels. I'll put the link so you can click and check it out. But we pulled up to this bookstore to pick up something, and it's no secret Corvettes are very low slung cars. You don't want to chew up the front end. Fortunately, you've got this front camera system here, so you just push that button and it gives you multiple feeds to show you just where the extremities of the car are. So we've obviously got plenty of room right there, playing it safe. Very helpful. You can also switch the feed using these different options down here. Howdy everyone. So you remember that Z mode I was telling you about? Chevy calls it a setting between sport and track, and you can configure a variety of settings however you like. And that's what I've done. I made it a mix of sport and track settings, and all I have to do to bring those online is hit this button on the steering wheel. Hear the roar of the track exhaust, and up here I'm gonna get a taste of the sport steering. It's got just the right weight to it. Some sport steering settings can be a little too heavy, but in the C8 Corvette it feels just right. Also got the powertrain set to sport. As you can tell, it's pretty lively. There's one final major setting aside from my mode, which I showed you before, and that of course is track. So I'll just turn this dial until we're in the full track setting. And yeah, you can definitely hear it, but you can also feel it in the steering. The steering is really heavy compared to the other modes. Like even though we're on a straight road, I can feel it, because when I try to turn it a little bit off center, like, yeah, the weight is just packed in there. Oh boy, yeah. Exhaust is so vocal at every stage. I'll leave it on track for these curves because I feel like getting an arm workout this morning. There we go. Just fully open, fully expressive. Yeah, that's steering. You know, you have to earn it. And then the brakes are also snappier too. All right, here we go. But yeah, just that steering is just so planted. And I'd say that's a good test of them. Even in track mode, easy to modulate. There was no big snatch and grab moment that jerked us around or anything. Just very smooth, very controlled. Sounds great doing it. Thanks for joining me and watching my review of the 2020 C8 Corvette. I hope to see you here next time on There Will Be Cars.